right, hello and welcome to another Drive With Me episode, show where I discuss current events and have recently been talking about video games more than I expected to on this channel. But there have been some new developments. It seems like there's almost a cascade of generally bad news lately, especially when it comes to the industry at large or major publishers and what they're up to. From Sony really having a bad time with Bungie to now announcing that they're ceasing physical disc production by 2028, and now hearing about Xbox and Microsoft and their massive cuts and their studio spin-offs and sell-offs and so on. It's just seems like it's a bit of a rough time for the industry as a whole, much of it anyway, especially some of the big players. Plus, on top of it, you have Valve that announced that they're raising the prices of the Steam Deck, and they are keeping prices unfortunately high. It sounds like higher than they wanted for like the Steam Machine. So it's just kind of a generally disappointing situation within the industry as a whole, and some of it is hardware stuff that they can't really control, but a lot of it comes back to AI. Then I also was hearing about / reading that Epic and their use of Unreal Engine, whether it be for developing assets for Fortnite or for what the tools they're integrating into Unreal Engine 6 as they're working on it, involve a lot of generative AI. And Epic, that is, just recently announced, within the last couple months, announced mass layoffs as well. Then talk about how much more streamlined the workflows are with the use of AI, but nobody's losing their jobs because of it, even though everything would seem to indicate otherwise. And it's interesting and a little disturbing because I think what we're seeing in tech more broadly and gaming as a whole is really kind of a more intense version of what we see throughout much of the economy, right? So in many respects, what is called generative artificial intelligence is functionally an industrialization of creative or intellectual work. That's what a lot of it is. It's actually synthesized responses, and often people need to spend quite a bit of time, if you will, fixing things that AI just made mistakes on, whether it be art generation or video generation or text or whatever the case may be. As I've discussed in previous videos, AI is functionally a really complex set of algorithms that'll be specialized to different functions depending on what it is you're wanting it to do. And then within that, it's weighing a whole bunch of different probabilities based on a huge amount of data that often comes from the internet and is often processed in off-site facilities like these AI data centers, for example, which is functionally very similar to the cloud infrastructure that's been being built out for the last almost 2 decades now. Actually, if you go back to even like when email started, it goes back even further, because technically email is and has been a cloud-based system and service for quite some time now. And so the AI often is really stacking on top of these technologies and then taking concepts that have already existed and putting it together in a new and admittedly fairly innovative way and coming up with some interesting solutions. However, it is absolutely not replacing humans, and it is definitely not coming up with anything particularly new. It's weighing probabilities and putting stuff together in slightly different ways. So that's functionally what it does, right? And a lot of your big CEOs across tech in particular have been pushing this technology while saying it's not going to eliminate jobs and it's going to create new jobs and so on. All they've really been engaging in real time has been layoffs, right? And advocating for layoffs and having artists do more with less and engineers do more with less and so on. And they're claiming that this is a major productivity tool, and over time it probably will become that. However, There's definitely a lot of dangers that are present in this whole AI integration process. And on top of that, when you have the corporatization and major financialization of what is fundamentally a hobbyist in like industry like video games, it's a little bit very concerning for me to see, because it is that much worse and more intense in many other industries, especially those that are necessities, so housing and food and healthcare and so on. Those have been consolidating and financializing and corporatizing and trying to really cut corners for decades already, and now we're seeing it even in fields that for a good long while were really innovative and really dynamic, and now you're even seeing this kind of these corrupting influences influence all sorts of industries that they had not previously touched. And so it's more of a wider concern that I have about the American economy and the world economy by extension. So Xbox, announced that they're laying off like over 3,000 people. I want to say like 3,800 employees, and they're starting off with like 13 or 1,500, something like that. And announced like Undead Labs and Ninja Theory and Compulsion and what's the other one? Double Fine. They are all either being sold or spinning off to become independent companies. And apparently, even Arcane Leon in France is kind of on the chopping block, and they're in active negotiations now. So there's part of that seems kind of predictable. It's unfortunate that Microsoft spent so much money to gobble up a whole bunch of intellectual property and studios from around the industry just to turn around and handle it all so poorly. It really seems like they could have spent less money on starting up some new studios and adding to the industry and adding intellectual property. That probably would have been a better, go of the whole thing. Likely would have produced better results, but here we are. So we're in a state where AAA gaming is widely considered, and I consider it also to be in an increasingly worse state, with functions like always online and increasingly restricted digital rights management and increasingly going digital and tying these things to your account. And now they're trying to get rid of physical altogether, which really is code for, on the larger scheme of things, getting rid of direct ownership. If it is digital and they control the servers that these things are downloaded from, they get to determine largely how long you keep it, because they know you're likely not buying solid state drives or even old school hard drives large enough to be able to store these things. And you're almost definitely not printing them on like read only discs to keep for yourself. If they even, they likely have things to prevent that from happening in the first place. So a lot of this whole process involves handing over increasing control and influence to large corporations, and they are increasingly grabbing it with an almost naked aggression. And you see this, it's really seemed to increase in severity and depth notably since COVID. It's been there under the surface. It's almost like when fungi, when it's spreading out, like the mycelium will spread out under the soil, right? And then when the conditions are right, they will produce mushroom caps, and then they'll spore, right? And then they'll basically die off, and then the mycelium will continue doing its thing in an attempt to basically spread itself, right? That's kind of what seems to be happening here, where the mycelium of the corruption in the American economy has been in the background and under the soil, so to speak, for quite a while. And the 2020s has been when it's definitely, you've had more of a notable demonstration of it. Huge increases in prices, right? Often not even necessary, like egg producers that didn't even struggle with bird flu, that were majorly raising their egg prices just because they could, right? And theme parks that are raising their prices, and everything from clothing to cars to computer hardware, all this kind of, even like that whole issue, right? With memory, it's not that memory is now notably more expensive to produce. For the producers of RAM and solid state drives and so on, the production costs has remained virtually the same. The issue is that demand has gone up and supply is constricted, so now they're charging more for it because they can, right? And so if we all enjoy living in this kind of capitalist system where fewer and fewer control these supply chains, and where we see these kind of massive increases in products all around our economy, then you're that kind of rah-rah for this type of crony capitalism type, then I guess good for you. You can go ahead and click out of this video. But for the rest of us that like a certain semblance of stability and consistency and fairness and equity, this is a fucking problem. And it's been a problem for a long time, and it's only going to get worse. And it's one of the main reasons why the cost of living is getting out of hand rather quickly, and it's getting more difficult generation over generation to hit many of the like adulthood milestones of getting married and having children and owning a home and so on, because just the cost to survive and just the cost to rent and the cost to just get a car, everything is more, takes a larger chunk of your buying power, while wages are just simply not keeping up. And so are there ways around it? Is this still a very dynamic nation and a dynamic economy? And are there ways to, overcome it? Sure, absolutely. But fewer and fewer people are going to be able to. And there are fewer people now that can do it than they could 20 years ago or 40 years ago. And in another 20 years, there will likely be even fewer that can do it, and so on. The margins keep closing. That's the issue. It's not that the American dream is completely dead. It's not that the United States is some third world nation or anything like that. And anybody that seems to think that those of us that complain about these things, that's what we're stating, is just, you're either misunderstanding or you're doing so willfully, right? You're misrepresenting it entirely. So I want to make sure that's very clear, that the United States still pretty great country in many respects, and you can still move your way up over time and still build wealth and so on, but there are a lot of structural issues, and we're seeing it even in things like video games. And there are natural cycles to business, right? Ups and downs. And we saw a huge amount of investment around COVID. And now for the last several years, we've seen a lot of layoffs and a lot of closures and a lot of things just not going well for the industry on a developer and publisher side. And now even on a hardware side, we're seeing major price increases and supply crunch and so on. So it's there's some rough times here, and that kind of stuff is impacting everybody. Whether you're trying to get a work laptop or a personal computer or a gaming console or a cell phone even, right? Just trying to get an iPhone or an Android phone. Like, everything's getting more expensive and will likely continue to for the foreseeable future. So it's going to impact everybody. We should all be concerned about this. And even though things like, Epic using generative AI and Unreal Engine increasingly to make assets for Fortnite may individually not seem like a big deal, it's very indicative of where the economy is moving, what CEOs across the board are trying to do. And when you have AI CEOs showing up at like the G7 summit, for example, and sitting alongside world leaders of the largest economies on the planet, that's a concern, because they are unelected leaders and they don't represent us. They represent one facet of one industry. So it is very strange how unduly supported and important these people seem to be when they really shouldn't be. And they really functionally aren't. They represent an industry that is developing and emerging as what may become a very effective tool set for effectively industrializing the service and creative sectors and allowing fewer people to do a lot more, which will have its benefits. But to act like this is just unabashedly good and move forward full steam ahead without any kind of, guardrails, very indicative of modern America, unfortunately. So we need to be aware of that and realize what AI is, what it isn't, what they're trying to make it become, the nature of how much of this is propaganda and not actual real change yet. and also see how it's impacting the job market before it's actually impacting productivity on the same level. It's not even at all. They're laying people off as fast as they can under the promise that AI will help offset a lot of this. And even Microsoft seems to be kind of getting into this boat. It is a little concerning that Asha Sharma, I believe is how you pronounce her name, she comes from an AI division at Microsoft too, and now she comes into Xbox and is talking about how unprofitable it is and how everything, a whole bunch of stuff needs to be cut and the whole business model needs to be updated, which is a deep concern. So yeah, there's a lot in general, as far as I'm concerned, that is worth staying aware of and making sure that we're protecting ourselves as individuals, as families, that we are in fields that are ideally as protected from this kind of stuff as possible, but also developing skill sets and maybe even going back to like trade schools or what have you, learning things and putting things in place, systems in place that allow us to become more independent and less dependent on a global system and on the prices that we have virtually no control over, whether that be sewing your own clothes or starting your own garden or just budgeting more effectively or investing in a stock portfolio for retirement, or honestly, it'd kind of be best to diversify, as they say, and do a whole bunch of these at the same time. Because there are definite headwinds coming, and we're feeling a lot of them already. But I think the 2020s are more than anything a reflection of what is to come, what has been developing under the surface, and now these are the proverbial mushroom caps that are really indicative of what forces are going to have the most impact on us moving forward into the 2020 or the 2030s and the 2040s. And so in many respects, I think financially, for the vast majority of the middle class and working class Americans, this gets worse before it gets better. And I would very much recommend and like to see us fight back against this, regardless of where you're at on the political spectrum. It doesn't really matter. Like, corruption should be something all of us stand against. Consolidation of industry is something that we should all stand against. Like, it's funny how much I hear that communism is a problem when it functionally represents consolidation of industry under the state, but consolidation of industry under the private sector is honestly just as, if not more dangerous, because at least the state isn't dependent on profit. It does, it has a monopoly on violence, well, at least theoretically, and it does control things from a top-down structure, so it has its own issues, and that's part of the reason why state industrialized communism is not really historically been a great system. But state industrial privatized capitalism that then controls functionally our political system is not much better. And many of the ills that the Soviet Union preached about the damage and the danger of capitalism, that it would become corrupt and oligarchic and would imprison its people under the yoke of constant work with lower wages and effective slavery and inequality and so on. It's slowly but surely happening, even in this nation that often considers itself the greatest on the planet. And so the sooner we wake up and take the blinders off and get angry about that, you can still have peace in your own life, or at least chase that, but be aware and intolerant of how dysfunctional our system has become collectively. Sooner that happens on a large scale, the sooner we have an opportunity to actually change it. So I appreciate y'all listening. If you made it this far into the video, thank you. Please feel free to hit the like button if you did. And that's really all I had today. It's mostly Xbox, Epic Games, and AI, right? Like, it seems to be a topic that related to it. Gaming and technology and how it relates to current events and AI and so on seems to be something that I've talked about more than I expected to lately. Yeah, but we can make things better. We can improve things, and nothing is really written in stone, and even things that have already occurred or have already emerged as industries or trends or a power structure that already exists, everything can be changed. Any empire or group of people that have ever existed has always faced severe change or collapsed under their own weight, right? Even the Vatican, like the Catholic Church, is an example of there's actually been some pretty major changes, and it is in many respects a shadow of its former self, even though it still exists, right? So I hope that we all kind of take heart at that, because we can and will impact things, even if it takes a while. We will get there. So a lot of it's a matter of determining what direction we want this to go, and then speaking with as unified a voice as possible, and developing the infrastructure and the organizations and so on that allows us to get there. So thank you again. Hope you all have a good one, and we'll talk soon. You guys enjoy hearing about politics, economics, current events, etc. Stick around. We'll be talking about it later.